Hey, bestie. Welcome to the Spoiled Girly Support Group podcast where we talk about how to get that bag while also securing your own bag. I'm your host, Elle, and let's get into it. On today's episode, we are talking about why women compete with each other and why we so often use beauty as a means of competing with each other, and how we can end this behavior, okay? It's not it anymore, okay? We're way past that now. Now, we have a lot to cover, but before we get into it, I need you to hit the like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you never miss a Spoiled Girly episode. With that being said, let's get into it. Today's class was inspired by this video.
You know how women are constantly in competition with one another in all of the ways, but specifically with appearance, whether we think someone is skinnier, curvier, younger, more beautiful, or favorable characteristics than us aesthetically. This actually stems from 100 years ago, where when the only thing that women were unfortunately bringing to the table at that time was their appearance. It was their child rearing abilities. That's what makes a woman attractive instinctually. So when another woman was more attractive than you 100 years ago, you could lose your man. You could lose your house, your family, everything. So the fear of that threat is deeply ingrained in our genetic makeup through epigenetics. It's been passed on generation to generation. We could just lose everybody because they chose somebody over us. But that fear is no longer legitimate. It's still carried in our DNA, so that's why we react to that competition, that fear, that threat. But it's on us to take personal responsibility to say, there's no actual real threat in a woman being seemingly more attractive than me. And I also have something else to bring to the table than just what my appearance is.
I want to call this phenomenon of women competing with each other using beauty as the Beauty Olympics. And it's how our society has framed beauty as this competitive, sport like endeavor where there are winners and losers. And this female intersexual competition vibe is so prevalent that there are so many examples of it in popular culture, such as in TV shows like Gossip Girl or movies like Black Swan and Mean Girls. And the female characters, they're usually portrayed as opposites of each other, and if they're not pitted against each other within the TV show or the movie, people pit them against each other in real life whenever these TV shows or movies are analyzed.
Don't be a Carrie, be a Charlotte. Natasha was who Big wanted but couldn't have, so he had to settle for Carrie.
Claire Wilson cautions in her article titled Female Rivalry in Film, a Toxic Dynamic. And she talks about the negative effects of constantly consuming media that showcases women going against other women. She writes, the female rivalry trope is not necessarily a bad one, but when we see it over and over again in media, we internalize it. When all we see is women tearing each other apart instead of helping each other, we come to think that competition is necessary to achieve success. And we fail to realize that our greatest successes are won through female collaboration. And I love how Wilson brought up collaboration because the top down comparison ranking vibe is inherently patriarchal, and undoing this superior versus inferior dichotomy narrative in our minds is one step closer to bringing us back to collaborative matriarchy and basically comparing ourselves to each other and upholding one archetype of women as superior over another and ranking ourselves on a scale is patriarchal thinking. Okay, so the vibe today is just to figure out how we can stop hating each other and comparing ourselves with each other and dividing ourselves from each other so that we would be more easily conquered. Okay, and it starts here inside us. To help us undo this comparison ranking mode of thought, let's talk about beauty and why we women still use it as a tool to compete with each other. And the first reason is survival. In her TED Talk titled Why You Will Never Feel Like the Most Beautiful Woman, French archaeologist and historian Charlie Danger describes the concept of female rivalry as a subconscious or internalized fear of being supplanted by or outshined by another woman. Siufreda's article titled Female Rivalry and the Internalized Male Gaze relates how historically women relied on men for status, rights, and stability, which pushed us to compete with each other for the best male partner by focusing on looks. And this history of competing for male attention created this deep internalized pressure for women to be beautiful to win a secure life. And this also explains why we still feel rivalry around beauty today. And to quote a 2020 paper titled, our grandmother's legacy, challenges faced by female ancestors leave traces in modern women's same sex relationships. The article writes, across history, women were largely denied independent access to resources, often depending on male partners provisioning to support themselves and their children. Same-sex peers thus became women's primary romantic rivals in competing to attract and retain relationships with the limited partners able and willing to invest. Modern women show signs of this competition, disliking and aggressing against those who threaten their romantic prospects, targeting especially physically attractive and sexually uninhibited peers. However, women also rely on one another for aid, information, and support. As most social groups were patriarchal across history, upon marriage, women left for their families to reside with their husbands. Female ancestors likely used reciprocal altruism or mutualism to facilitate cooperative relationships with nearby unrelated women. To sustain these mutually beneficial cooperative exchange relationships, women may avoid competitive and status-striving peers, instead preferring kind, humble, and loyal allies. Ancestral women who managed to simultaneously compete for romantic partners while forming cooperative female friendships would have been especially successful. Women may therefore have developed strategies to achieve both competitive and cooperative goals, such as guising their intersexual competition as prosociality or vulnerability. And this is the author's insight into the possible opportunities for intervention. If one's goal is to promote female cooperation or reduce manifestations of female competition, e.g., bullying, queen bee syndrome, dislike of female leaders, a careful consideration of the particular obstacles recurrently encountered by our female ancestors may be illuminative. The patterns uncovered here suggest efficacious interventions will target competitive women who are likely both the perpetrators and victims of intersexual relational aggression. At minimum, a nuanced understanding of the predictors and manifestations of female intersexual competition and cooperation allow women to make informed decisions about their treatment of same-sex peers. And that's what we're doing in today's class, discovering a nuanced understanding of why and how we compete with each other and how we can treat each other better. Another study conducted across 3 countries reveals that female rivalry is well and truly alive in modern society. And it looked into the experiences of married women aged 24 to 45, and the research revealed that compared to men, women in this age group were more likely to feel competitive towards their same-sex peers who had qualities or resources that they admire or want for themselves. And apparently, women are more likely to respond negatively to resource asymmetry by competing with other women. And resource asymmetry is basically a situation where resources like money, information, power, or access are unevenly distributed among individuals, groups, or organizations. And this imbalance means that one party has more resources than the other, which can lead to unequal advantages or influence. Resource asymmetry has been associated with self-reported competitive reactions in females, although the specific pattern of results is mixed. In one study, women predicted that they would be more aggressive when competing in a resource-poor context. Similarly, women showed increased self-sexualization behavior when income inequality increased, suggesting greater self-promotion. In contrast, women perceive same-sex rivals as more competitive when they are in resource-rich contexts. Finally, there is evidence that resource scarcity affects females' competitive attitudes, but levels of envy modulate the direction of the effect. Nonetheless, envy of others' resources is considered a prime motivator of competitiveness. And these findings are also supported by UNM psychology professor Tanya Reynolds' article titled "A Slim Majority: The Influence of Sex Ratio on Women's Body Dissatisfaction and Weight Loss Motivations." Reynolds writes, "Although women do not often compete using physical blows, they are not the passive creatures society portrays them to be. Women compete for status, resources, information, and social partners. ... Across many species, females compete with one another. This competition becomes more intensified in female-skewed sex ratios where there are fewer mates and more rivals. When men were abundant, women felt more secure in their bodies and less motivated to lose weight. When men were relatively scarce, women felt more insecure about their bodies because these environments are more competitive to attract or keep romantic partners." All this to say, because historically women have been shut out of ownership and production of resources, we always had to rely on men for said resources, and access to men meant attracting men and competing with each other to attract those men. So in essence, women have been programmed to use their beauty in this competition for survival. And aside from seeing beauty as survival, we also see beauty as a status symbol. I recently came across this interesting post on Threads, which talks about how beauty standards and status symbols are almost interchangeable. Elizabeth Wheatley writes, beauty standards and status symbols are almost interchangeable. Something I wish people, especially tween, teen, 20 something girls, knew is that beauty standards always have and always will favor the wealthy or ruling class. Like back in medieval Europe, when food scarcity and famine were an ever present threat, the ideal woman had a pot belly because she had food, pale skin because she didn't have to work outside, and small chest because she had wet nurses for her kids and didn't breastfeed. Today, the US is no longer an agrarian society, and most of our jobs are indoors. Thus, being tan for naturally pale people became a symbol of someone who had the privilege of outdoor leisure time, ergo, the rise of the spray tan and tanning bed. At the same time, we've mostly solved famine in our country, and so now idealize the toned, muscled physique of people who again have the time to spend 10 to 20 plus hours a week exercising for the aesthetics, which is not necessarily the same thing as health. Not to mention, beauty standards always favor the dominant ethnic group. You can tell what group is dominant by what facial features, hair color, hairstyles, skin tones, etc. are idealized within a culture. For example, here in the US, while naturally pale people are trying to look tan, those more endowed with melanin are pushed to be paler. Granted, the US is a massive country and regional beauty standards vary largely even within my home state of Texas, Dallas versus Austin, for instance, but the rule holds true regardless. TLDR, beauty standards are decided not by evolution or health and not even necessarily what's desirable to the opposite sex. They are all decided by money. I wish we'd all collectively agree to stop beating ourselves up over them. And you know what? Valid. And with social media and the internet, it is no surprise how influencers are now part of the modern day ruling classes. Apparently, a lot of people are bringing photographs of Kim Kardashian or Kylie Jenner to their plastic surgeon's office as a reference for how they want to look. Like, it is clear that the visibly wealthy, they're the ones who set the tone for how everyone else should look like. And this look, which journalist Gia Tolentino describes as Instagram face in her 2019 article in The New Yorker, has become so prized among young women that the steps necessary to achieve it have also become an important marker of status. Tolentino writes, in a world where women are rewarded for youth and beauty in a way that they are rewarded for nothing else, and where a strain of mainstream feminism teaches women that self-objectification is progressive because it's profitable, cosmetic work might seem like one of the few guaranteed high-yield projects that a woman could undertake. And the idea that beauty signals wealth or success isn't even exclusive to cosmetic surgery. There's also expensive beauty treatments, high-quality makeup. Like, the cost of beauty often requires a sizable disposable income, which reinforces its sense of status and privilege. So if you've ever heard the line, like, you're not ugly, you're just poor, in this day and age, like, it's the reality.
You're not ugly, you're just broke. Like, this was me a year ago, this is me today, obviously. I like to think that I went through like a fairly decent glow up, but the thing is, like, my glow up was in direct correlation to an increase to the amount of money that I was making. And it's time that we finally talk about this because I want to be honest. So let's talk about how much money that I spend in a year to be me. Starting off with the gym.
So I did actually used to go to a normal gym and weightlift, and that was like $20 a month. But I hurt my back, so I started Pilates. That is $200 a month times 12, which is $2,400. Next up is Botox. I have one.
And Abby goes on to list the things that she got done and concludes that she spent $8,500 for her glow up. And if she were to do these procedures annually, it would be around $8,500 a year. Because, yeah, they never end. And one thing I want to emphasize is how much of women's resources and wealth goes to these beauty practices and routines and procedures, and how the pursuit of beauty and the lengths you will go for this pursuit is 100% a wealth indicator. And like, okay, so why do we do it? It's because beauty is social currency. Think of social currency as assets that you hold in social interactions. It's things like having knowledge, skills, or even connections that you can exchange for social or professional advantages. And in society, being beautiful can put you at an advantage. And if you've ever heard about pretty privilege, I feel like we've talked about it so much. But like, if you've heard of it, you'll know what I mean, okay? But for those who don't know, pretty privilege is basically when people with good looks, their good looks can serve as a gateway to certain privileges or opportunities that may not be as readily available if they were not as attractive. Commenters have also shared their experience. Someone said,
For real, when I went from overweight to underweight quick, the most triggering thing was actually seeing how people gave me a chance socially.
and this better treatment that people experience when they're conventionally beautiful shows up in many different ways. To quote a Time article titled Pretty People Really Do Have It Better, The author writes, "People will buy you drinks at bars, randomly do nice things for you, give you gifts, and generally go out of their way for you. Economic advantages abound too. Attractive people are more likely to receive raises, promotions, and be heard in the workplace, and the perception of their productivity and value to a company is outsized." And human psychology offers insight as to why this exists. Thanks to a cognitive bias called the halo effect, someone's positive trait, in this case their beauty, influences our opinions of them, causing us to believe that one positive trait points to the existence of other positive traits. So basically, when we come across someone who is conventionally beautiful, conventionally attractive, our mind comes up with these false narratives that we just projected on them because we thought that, because subconsciously we were thinking like, well, if they're beautiful outside, they also must be beautiful inside, they also must be smart, they also must be this and that, like good positive things. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't, okay? And the quote also brings up another reason why women cannot shake off the pursuit of beauty and therefore competing with other women with beauty. And it's because beauty is actual currency. A study titled Beauty in the Labor Market explored the correlation between attractiveness and earnings, showing that more attractive individuals often earn more than their peers. And a meta analysis titled The Effects of Physical Attractiveness on Job Related Outcomes provided evidence on the beauty premium, indicating that attractiveness can influence job opportunities, salaries, and career progression. All this to say, because beauty is closely tied to women's economic well being and success, many of us find it hard to shake off the pursuit of beauty and therefore find it hard to shake off competing with other women. So, should we all just be ugly then? Whenever people talk about the effects of beauty standards on women and how we relate to each other, one of the more popular advice is to make yourself quote unquote ugly, to stop catering to the male gaze, make yourself ugly to men, make yourself ugly, period. But I don't agree that we should subject ourselves to yet another standard to cater to or not cater to men, because we are still caring about what they desire, or in this case, what they don't desire. Like, we're still centering them. So these women say that, oh, well, then just be ugly. They think that by rejecting traditional beauty standards, they hope to push back against the pressure to look a certain way. But like intentionally defying beauty ideals, it may not make the difference that we want to make. And it's because beauty standards run deep, okay? As we have discussed, like one of the biggest challenges with using appearance as a form of protest is that beauty standards are deeply rooted in society. From the earliest civilizations, humans have had definitions of what's attractive, and these ideas of beauty have long been linked to power, status, and social norms. Also, beauty standards are constantly shifting and evolving, so what's considered beautiful or ugly isn't fixed. So, what one person might see as a rejection of beauty norms, another might see as an interesting fashion statement. And this subjectivity makes it difficult to make a universal statement by intentionally changing one's looks. And second, looking ugly, quote unquote, may not disrupt beauty culture. Choosing to make yourself ugly can actually reinforce beauty standards instead of challenging them. Researchers argue that simply rejecting traditional beauty standards doesn't eliminate the system that supports them. And Naomi Wolf in The Beauty Myth points out that beauty ideals are so powerful that they can adapt to almost any type of rebellion. When people try to protest by looking less attractive, the beauty industry can still interpret it as an aesthetic choice and even commodifying and selling it as a trend. And we already touched on this topic in a past class where we talked about the emergence of ugly beauty and ugly fashion, and they were both forms of protest, of resistance, and then they became trends. Another example is how in the 1990s, female hero chic became a popular look, celebrating an unhealthy appearance as fashionable. And once again, what started as rebellion against polished beauty standards quickly became a new standard itself. And this trend demonstrated that beauty culture can absorb non traditional looks and then frame them as desirable and marketable, and at the end of the day, reinforcing the very standards that people were trying to resist. And another more timely example is how women started shaving their heads as a form of protest after the recent elections. And the women who are doing this, they drew backlash from the women undergoing chemo or experiencing alopecia who had no choice on whether they should keep their hair or not. And they felt like the women who were shaving their heads as protest is reinforcing how undesirable and ugly women with no hair are. Okay, so like by rejecting their own hair, the women shaving their heads reinforce that hair, and specifically long hair, is the beauty standard, and everyone else who doesn't have that is ugly. So very, very interesting. And also, Ironically, for many people, beauty can also be a form of self expression and empowerment. So, women usually find confidence in makeup, fashion, and like styling choices to enhance their appearance. Camille Paglia even argues that rejecting beauty entirely can feel like rejecting creativity and self care, which can be empowering in their own ways. So, just because someone embraces beauty products or enjoys looking attractive doesn't mean that they're conforming to a narrow standard. It could simply be a form of self expression, and obviously with nuance, okay? Nuance, Nelly? But framing beauty as bad, it reinforces this idea that caring about your appearance is shallow or wrong, when in reality, it is a complex part of human identity. Women can embrace their beauty in their own way without being controlled by it. And one thing I also wanted to bring up was how we talked about in a past class, like our brains and bodies, we thrive when we are surrounded by beauty. And distressing ourselves by creating an ugly to us appearance is not at all empowering. So, okay, what's the solution? If disavowing beauty standards completely and making yourself quote unquote ugly is not the solution, then what is? On top of expanding our narrow definition of beauty to include different manifestations of beauty, as we talked about in a past class, we can stop using beauty to compete with other women by removing the pressure to conform to these beauty standards and competing, period. Throughout human history, women were more dependent upon men to provide for themselves and their children. This is less true today when women have greater access to education, jobs, resources, and social support. Today, we have many more routes to status and security than by our romantic partners alone. In short, by understanding where all this pressure is coming from, like we just did, and adopting a nuanced and like maybe even complicated relationship with beauty, we can stop viewing each other as competition for resources or romantic partners. Because only then can we begin to free ourselves from it. And now that many women are accessing jobs, money, and resources all on their own, like there is less need for us to adhere to these narrow definitions of beauty, and therefore less need for us to compete with each other and bring each other down and put each other down and divide ourselves. Like, that's not the vibe anymore. Okay? So, yeah, that's all I have for you today. I just wanted to let you know that you have so much inherent worth and value in a world that is hell bent on devaluing you. Now get that bag, bestie. Also, bestie, wake up.